The NBA's biggest brand is apparently pursuing college basketball's best head coach. Are we about to see a seismic shift in college basketball in early June?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This fine gentleman to my side is Mr. Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch. Remind you that every episode you can find ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all of you everydayers joining us, as well as all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. All right, folks, it's the big news. It's Thursday as we record. We're time-stamping this thing. It is 12:41 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but this is going to be our Friday show because this is the biggest news and we got to get ahead of it. Reports came out from Adrian Wojnarowski on Thursday morning, first thing, that the Lakers are in hot pursuit of Danny Hurley and dropping that bag. So here's where we're going to go with our conversations. Talk about the ins and outs of what we know right now. We're going to talk about what do you do if you're a player on this roster and Coach Hurley ultimately leaves. And then if Danny Hurley heads to the West Coast, how on earth do you go about replacing him? Andy Patton, get us going.
Yeah. First of all, being on the West Coast, you wake up to news like this that's already an hour and a half old. I woke up, saw a bunch of text messages, saw a bunch of notifications, was like, what in the heck is going on? But yeah, it turns out that it's going to be pretty big news when the biggest, most successful college basketball coach currently in the sport is getting pursued by the biggest brand in the entire basketball landscape in the country, in the Los Angeles Lakers. That's a pretty big storyline. So not surprised to see all the attention here. What we know so far, again, as we're recording this right now at a little before 1 p.m. Eastern time, is that Danny Hurley has met with the team and he has indicated to them that there is a pursuit happening, that there are conversations being had. So he's being very upfront, being very forthright with his team. I suspect if you're somebody like Alex Karaban, who has just recommitted to this program for another year, that even though there is some honesty, some openness, that's probably still a little bit frustrating, I think is the best way to put it for Karaban, thinking, that there was not really not necessarily expecting that this could happen, that something like this could potentially blow up the roster at this point. We'll get into what that might mean, but Danny Hurley has indicated he wouldn't leave UConn for anything other than an NBA job. And he put his money where his mouth is when he turned down Kentucky, the biggest brand in college basketball. He said, no, thanks. I want to stick with where I'm at. I'm going to stick at UConn. There's no reason for me to leave. But this is a different animal. It's more money, which whether the money even matters or not for Danny, I don't know, but it is going to be more money, potentially a lot more money to go to the Los Angeles Lakers. But beyond that, it's a new challenge. It's a new opportunity to go to the NBA. It's an opportunity to coach the greatest basketball player on the planet in LeBron James. It's an opportunity to go win NBA championships, coach this prestigious brand. Like it's a hard opportunity to pass up. Having said that, so is the opportunity to go for a three-peat, the opportunity to do something that hasn't been done since the early 70s. Like there's a lot at stake here, a lot of factors going into this. I think for Danny, obviously, it must feel great to be the very legitimate belle of the ball. How many coaches have been pursued by Kentucky and the Lakers in the same
cycle? That's right.
That is an insane testament to how valued he is as a basketball mind right now, and justifiably so. Winning 2 back-to-back national championships, never having a game within single digits is an extraordinary accomplishment, and he deserves those accolades. He deserves to have coaches and front offices and everybody throwing that back at him. But it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens. The latest from Dana O'Neill at The Athletic is that the deal is not done. UConn has not offered an extension yet. And I think that's part of this. Is this just like a leverage play? Is Danny trying to get a little bit more money from UConn, a little bit more of a guarantee, a lifetime type contract situation? If they throw the bag at him in that regard, would he stay? Would he spurn the Lakers? Again, how many coaches have been offered Kentucky and the Lakers in the same offseason? Probably very few. I bet none of them have turned them both down. That would be an incredible flex for Danny Hurley to be able to turn down the Kentucky Wildcats and the Los Angeles Lakers in the same offseason. Not saying that's what's happening, but if he's using this for leverage, that's a pretty big move by Danny Hurley.
Yeah. Good. I mean, we hear of coaches using, opportunities for leverage to get a bigger bag. Like I think of somebody recently, I feel like Mick Cronin did that a couple years ago or something. But dude, if he's using the Lakers as leverage, that's straight gangster, Andy. Like, and I wouldn't put it past him because that's the level of crazy that Danny Hurley is, but I kind of love it. And you're absolutely right. If I know that as we speak, UConn hasn't offered an extension, but my goodness, if you are the University of Connecticut, you have to do every single thing you possibly can to maintain this dude as your head coach, right?
Yeah.
Like whether if you're a booster, if you're part of the athletic department, if you're part of the NIL collective, you just got to start doing everything you can to make this work. But on the Danny Hurley side of things, Andy, as I started thinking about this, I don't know that there's a better time for him to leave. When is he ever going to be a hotter commodity than he is right now? And I know that based on the acumen that he's already shown, he's going to get more NBA opportunities. But I'm just saying, to get this gig right now at what that contract's going to be, I mean, you got to strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, there's literally the only thing Danny Hurley could do to increase his desirability on the market is win a third championship. That's literally it. If they went to the championship next year and lost, that would be incredible. Don't get me wrong, but it's still not it's still not increasing his desirability on the open market. Kentucky was in on him. Los Angeles was in on him. Those jobs don't come open the same time very often. It's really hard to imagine turning down this job at this point because you may never get this opportunity again. And there is risk. There is risk. If Danny has 2 okay years with the UConn Huskies for the next 2 years, or even 3, or even 4 decent years at UConn, he's not losing his job. If he has 2 okay years with the Los Angeles Lakers, he's gone. Look at the history of how long coaches last with the Los Angeles Lakers. Look at that same history with how long coaches last with LeBron James. Compare those two things together. You're not going to find a lot of coaches who have been there longer than 2 years. The odds for Danny Hurley of taking this job are fairly high that he would be unemployed within a couple of years. Even if he does great, I think his scheme will translate at the NBA level. I think he's good enough to coach at the next level, but the Lakers are in a really tough spot. They have a bunch of money lined up with certain players. They're just not in a position where they could turn it around suddenly with a new coach and win the championship. If Danny does that, he becomes one of the greatest coaches literally of all time. But if he doesn't, he might find himself looking for a new job. That does not happen at UConn. He has so much goodwill at that program that it would never happen. Now, if Danny Hurley goes to the Lakers, has 2 or 3 seasons, does fine but not great, loses his job, and wants to come back to college basketball, he's going to get an opportunity. It's not going to end his career or anything like that, but it is still a risk to leave a place that has this much love for you, that you've built up this much goodwill, that is probably going to offer you something resembling a lifetime contract here in the next 24 to 48 hours. It would be tough to leave that for even a prestigious program like the Lakers, where they're churning out coaches every couple of years, and they've been doing that for decades. There's a lot of obvious positives to why Danny Hurley should or could take this Lakers job, but that's a pretty significant downside as well.
Yeah, Andy, that's the exact point I had started typing in our notes as you were talking there. Think about a John Calipari who went and tried his hand at the NBA. He's doing just fine back in college. Thank you very much. So there's a very real world in which it's so why not take a shot? If you strike out, you know that every D1 opening is going to be foaming at the mouth to have him back. And those who don't have an opening would probably create one for him, unless other than a few certain schools. Here's the other thing, Andy. I think we so often say it's more desirable to go off to the NBA because it's perhaps easier. You're just coaching basketball. But we recently heard Kevin Young in the whole coaching carousel with John Calipari. And then when Coach Pope goes to Kentucky, Kevin Young said, I'm actually looking forward to leaving the NBA ranks to go to the college ranks. Now, that might be unique to him and his situation.
We'll see what he says a year from now, right?
Yes, exactly. But I don't want to just assume that the NBA is always better. And so, as you said earlier, we've got to wait and find out what is it that truly matters to Danny Hurley. Is it the money? Is it the opportunity to do it on the biggest level in La La Land, right? All of that comes together. And boy, I can't wait to see how this thing shakes out.
And that's the biggest thing next is if this does happen, it is a massive shift for the UConn Huskies. All their players have 30 days to enter the transfer portal. What is going to happen? Are players going to leave? How's Alex Karaban feeling right now after withdrawing from the NBA draft where he was very likely going to be selected? Is he going to be the hottest commodity in the transfer portal? Is he going to put his name in the portal? We got all of that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, patience, that's the formula for winning champions, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Isaac, let's talk the player side of this potential seismic move in college basketball. And again, for those of you who are just tuning in live, for those of you who are tuning in to this show at a later date, we are recording this live just before 1 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, a few hours after we found out that Danny Hurley is being pursued heavily by the Los Angeles Lakers. He's met with his team. They've had conversations. They're hoping to have some kind of conclusion to this entire saga by the end of the weekend. I will see it. There was a lot earlier in the offseason with Mark Pope in Kentucky. Everything was going slow until it wasn't. So we'll see what happens with this situation here. But for those who are unfamiliar with the rules right now, if Danny Hurley or any college basketball head coach leaves their program, the players on that team then have a 30-day window to choose to enter the transfer portal. This is part of the movement towards more kind of player focused in college athletics. I think it's the right move. For so long, players have been unable to leave schools when their coaches leave. They're going to a school to play for a coach. They're not usually going for other reasons. So it's unfortunate when players were getting stuck, unable to leave programs even after not getting to play for the coach they wanted to play for. But this creates a pretty huge potential seismic situation in college sports, because if Danny's gone, everybody on that UConn roster can enter the transfer portal. That includes Alex Karaban, who, I was saying this to you offline, Isaac, the amount of phone calls that Alex Karaban is currently getting right now. Every coach, every single coach, Pat Kelsey's calling him, Mark Pope is calling him, John Calipari is calling him, Rick Pitino is calling him, Rodney Terry's calling him. The list goes on and on and on and on. Everybody's calling Alex Karaban right now. I promise you that is happening and saying, hey, look, if you're interested, we can get you this amount of money. We can get you this playing time, et cetera, et cetera. I have no idea if Alex Karaban is actually going to even enter the transfer portal or entertain it if Danny Hurley leaves. But you have to imagine it's on his mind. You have to imagine it's part of the conversation. And it's not even just him. Their incoming freshman class, Liam McNeely, their incoming transfer class, Aiden Mahaney, Terrace Reed. Like, there's a lot of talent. There's a reason UConn's being considered a top 10 team, and it's not just because of Danny Hurley, although they get the benefit of the doubt just because of the coaching staff on the development that they've had with players in the past. I think you expect guys like Solomon Ball and Hassan Diarra and others to step up into bigger roles next year. But at this point, it could potentially be open season on the Huskies if Danny Hurley departs.
Yep, that's the exact way I phrased it on Twitter earlier today is, I mean, you know, I joked earlier that it's like even schools that don't have a head coach opening would create one. Yeah. Teams that have used all 13 scholarships already would be like, would you kindly move along? Because we'd like to grab Alex Karaban. Andy, I could see this going one of two ways. On one hand, it's, all right, guys, we came back for a purpose. Yes, we thought Coach Hurley was going to be part of that, but our goal and our intention is to win a third straight title, as you were talking about earlier. So look, yes, coach is gone, but we're going to circle the wagons and we're going to do this thing right. And we're going to be all in, even all the more so for each other, because that's all we got, right? Like, that's the narrative you can paint. And whoever would coach this team, which we'll talk about in the next segment, that's got to be their talking point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, again, we will talk about the coaching options, but if you can keep a coach who's maybe an assistant coach currently on the staff, somebody who's familiar with the team, who's maybe recruited some of these players, whether it's recruiting the incoming guys or the transfers, if you can keep somebody on staff who's familiar with the system and everything, that's probably going to help you retain players. If you cannot, if Danny Hurley takes his staff with him to the Lakers and they have to go to a completely different direction in the coaching hire, that's going to be hard. Yep. It's going to be difficult to convince Alex Karaban to stay and play for an entirely new coaching staff. Even if he loves Stores, even if he loves UConn, even if he, understands the ability to potentially lead a team to a third straight national championship. If you're like, oh, I'm going to play for a whole new coaching staff anyway, and now Rick Pitino's calling me or John Calipari's calling me or whomever, you're going to have to at least entertain that. And certainly, I think the players who aren't as connected to Stores, to UConn, to the back-to-back national championships, guys like Aiden Mahaney and Terrace Reed, or even a Liam McNeely type, like, they're not as connected. Like, they wanted to go play for Connecticut, but they also wanted to go play for Danny Hurley. Like, I don't think there's any mystery that Aiden Mahaney, like, he wants to go play for that coach. Yes, he wants to win a national championship. Yes, he wants to compete in the Big East at the highest level. But a lot of the things that Aiden Mahaney wants out of his next school can be accomplished at a program other than UConn. What he wanted there was to play for Danny Hurley. And now that he's not going to, if this happens, if he doesn't get that opportunity to do that, does he pull his name back out? Does, and there's guard needy programs out there. I mean, does Kansas just lost a guard? I know they replaced Elmarco Jackson with Shaquille Moore, but do they go after an Aiden Mahaney if he's available? Does North Carolina make a push for Terrace Reed? They desperately need some help in the front court, like, or a push for a Samson Johnson even. Like, there are big name programs who, if Louisville doesn't land Coleman Hawkins, who apparently they're willing to drop a big old bag on, if they don't drop the bag on him, they got a lot of money to spend. Are they going to turn and try to throw that at a Liam McNeely type, at somebody else on this UConn team? I mean, it's kind of a confluence of all the different factors in college basketball combining together right now. I know there's a lot of conversation that I'm seeing on social media today of like, this is proof that that college sports are in trouble. They're comparing this to Jim Harbaugh. Like, there's never been a time in the history of college basketball where a college basketball coaching job was more desirable than the Los Angeles Lakers. Like, if Danny Hurley does leave for the Lakers, it is not a big indictment on the sport of college basketball. It is an indication that the Los Angeles Lakers can continue to hire whoever the heck they want because they're the Los Angeles freaking Lakers. If Danny Hurley left UConn to go coach the Detroit Pistons, that's a different conversation. Maybe we are a little bit more concerned, but this is not something that would ultimately concern me in that regard. But the fact that there are no rules right now, I don't think it's bad that players can enter the portal after their coach leaves. I think that's understandable. Yep. But the fact that there are no regulations on income, the fact that there are no regulations on scholarship, like, there's just such a lack of rules right now. Like, teams are literally calling players at UConn right now. Again, I don't have sources on that, but I promise you that
it's happening.
Every player at UConn is getting phone calls from coaches. We're supposed to be stopping tampering. It's happening right now. It's happening right now. And it's just, there's a lot of messiness and kind of the fact that we're in this weird, I think what's going to be a short period of time where the NIL is active, but it is not regulated. This is kind of a wild, wild west era of college basketball, and a Danny Hurley departure and a UConn like mass exodus would be one of the biggest stories that I think we would remember 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, when we're looking at the history of college basketball and we're looking at the Wild West NIL era. I don't know what we'll call it, but maybe something like that. This story, if it happens the way that it could, is going to be a big part of that conversation. Remember when UConn won back-to-back national championships, Danny left for the Lakers and that whole team just dispersed because they all got a bunch of money somewhere else. If that happens, that is a huge story in the history of college basketball.
Andy, I would even go so far to say anytime a coach leaves for an NBA job, I don't care if it's the worst NBA program ever, right? Mm-hmm. Like it is not an indictment on our sport because it is the tip top level. It's just like a coach going from a D2 school to a D1 school. That's not an indictment on the D2 school. It's just, I want to go coach at the highest level of college basketball. And so I'm not worried about that. And yeah, I love what you put out there with, there's on one hand, the let's circle the wagons conversation. And the other hand is, nah, I'm out if Coach Hurley isn't here. And I don't want to relitigate the things you already said, Andy. But what I will say about that is what's so interesting to me about the transfer portal era is that you see how quickly what seems like the most stable and like consistent thing in our sport right now can be torn down potentially at a moment's notice because the guy at the top leaves, it triggers the 30-day window that you talked about earlier, and anybody and everybody could peace out if they so choose, just like what happened last offseason around this time when West Virginia lost Bob Huggins. Dudes are gone. They got a couple back, but a bunch of them are out the door, out the window. And that's exactly what could happen here. And so this thing that feels like a beacon of solid rock foundation in Storrs, Connecticut right now could be torn down by the end of the weekend, possibly.
I think the future recruits too, I'll just mention this real quick before we talk about some of the coaching stuff. Malik Thomas, talked about him with Tobias Bass on the Thursday episode of Locked On College Basketball, being pursued by UConn, also being pursued by Arkansas, Pitt, Auburn, a handful of others. If you don't know if Danny Hurley is going to be the coach, that's a little bit tougher to potentially end up there. They also have offers out for the first and fourth ranked player in the 2025 class. That's AJ Dybansa and Darius Acuff. You got to imagine that those recruits are taking a second look right now, depending on what happens with Danny. So this is going to have a long-term ramification for UConn if Danny leaves.
Very, very much so. Andy, this will be very interesting to see. And I think you're right. I think the most tenuous are the incoming transfers and the incoming freshmen if coach does leave. So obviously much more on that as we learn more news. But Andy, let's turn our attention now back to the coaching side of it, as we talked about a little bit ago and hinted at. If Coach Hurley is indeed gone, who does UConn target to replace him? The coaching carousel might just start spinning all over again, and we'll talk about that coming up in just a second. All right, Andy, if Coach Hurley does indeed decide to leave for the Los Angeles Lakers, there's a couple different ways to skin this cat, and we can look at both of them. I just talked about West Virginia and Bob Huggins. What they decided to do was put in an interim head coach as a short-term option, and then this offseason hired Darren DeVries from Drake to come be their more long-term option. That is one of the possibilities. Could you, if you're UConn, go short-term, give yourself a gap year, whatever it is? You could also look at a more long-term option, a more established coach who you could drop a bag and go get. I think all of those options are on the table, Andy, and I think we should unpack all of them. Where do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the first top option for UConn should be retaining one of their top assistant coaches and trying to keep this core together. I think that's the top way to go because it's a short-term but also a potential long-term play. The two options I'm thinking of are Luke Murray and Kimani Young. Luke Murray, the son of Bill Murray, been a fantastic offensive mind for them, an elite X's and O's coach. Young's a great recruiter. He does some offense and defensive stuff for them. Alex Karaban has said very directly recently, he said he believes he has 3 head coaches at UConn, referring to Murray, Young, and of course, Danny Hurley. If that is a sentiment shared by other players at UConn, that they feel like all of that trio of coaches are kind of like their effective head coaches, that would give a lot of confidence that potentially a move where Hurley leaves and either Murray or Young, or in an ideal world for UConn, both decide to stay with the program. One gets promoted to head coach, the other's the associate head coach. You might be able to retain some of your talent. Not only the returners who have this perception that these guys are kind of like pseudo head coaches, but also most of the guys they added, either in incoming recruits or transfers, were recruited by one of these two guys, so that you're not losing those pieces. Now, this may not be up to UConn. That is the big question mark. If we're talking about a reality where Danny Hurley takes this job from the Los Angeles Lakers, Danny's going to have some sway in terms of getting this position, not just from a money standpoint, but he may say, if you're going to hire me, you're hiring my staff. I want to bring my assistant coaches with me. I wouldn't blame Danny for wanting to do that. I wouldn't blame the Lakers for saying yes. I wouldn't blame the Lakers at all for saying, no, we want to put specific assistant coaches around you, because if they say that to Danny Hurley, he's probably going to say, no, thanks. I'm going to just stay where I'm at. So the unfortunate reality for UConn is, while this is what I think is the best option for them in terms of maintaining their roster, maintaining their style, their scheme, and their success, it may not be a realistic option, because Danny may be saying, hey, I'm taking Luke, I'm taking Kimani, we're all going with each other to Los Angeles. For those assistant coaches, it's a pay bump as well. It's an opportunity to become a head assistant coach in the NBA. Like, they're going to want that opportunity. They're going to jump at that opportunity. And it could leave UConn in a situation where they don't have the option to just throw an interim tag on a coach like West Virginia did and just move forward with that, because they may not have the majority of their coaching staff. They may all be headed to the City of Roses to go play with the Lakers.
Well, and I think part of that too, Andy, is thinking about like, what does Luke Murray want to do? What does Kamani Young want to do? Because if their goal is to ultimately become a college head coach, then going with Danny to the Lakers doesn't make any sense. And in terms of pay, if I remember correctly, going back to Kevin Young, he got a pay bump coming to be the head coach at BYU over being an assistant for the Suns. And so the money could actually be better staying at UConn. We've talked about like a big part of what has made UConn who they are is not just Danny Hurley. It is this intricate offense that they run, which is brought together by none other than Luke Murray. So if you lose Luke Murray, you can probably maintain part of that, right? But if you keep him, you definitely are able to keep that very intricate and unique offense intact. That could be a thing too. So I'm really interested to see if this goes through, what are the desires of those two assistant coaches? Another thing, Andy, with the hiring an assistant isn't a good long-term option. We've just seen it happen twice recently at Texas with Rodney Terry. That was in the midst of the season, obviously. And then this offseason with Jake Diebler at Ohio State, which was also a in-season thing that ended up working out. So, it's not necessarily this can't be the next guy. They very much could be. But Andy, if UConn loses Danny Hurley and decides to look outside of their assistant coaches, what are some options?
I think the top option has to be Steve Pikiell at Rutgers. I think that's the top choice right now, unquestionably, for a lot of reasons. One, he's a UConn alum. He played at UConn from 87 to 91, was kind of on those teams that really started to put UConn on the map as an actual college basketball power. He was an assistant coach the next season after his career ended. He was assistant coach under Jim Calhoun. He's a Bristol native. So all of the boxes get checked in terms of being from Connecticut, connection to the program, all of that. He's the current head coach at Rutgers. They've had a lot more success the last 5 years than they almost have ever had historically in their program. And they have two of the top recruits in the entire country joining the team this year in Ace Harbor and Dylan Bailey. Like this is, they have the two top recruits coming in. Really, really exciting stuff being built at Rutgers. And if UConn can find a way to convince Pikiell to leave, there's not a lot of coaches who I think are super enthused about the idea of leaving their program in June. It's a really messy situation to be in. You don't want to leave. You've already built your roster. You've already had your offseason. You then have to go through the entire offseason process again, effectively. I get why coaches aren't chomping at the bit to do that, but Pikiell might, because of his connections to UConn, because it's a big step up from the job at Rutgers, because he could potentially bring two top recruits from this incoming class with him to UConn. There's no guarantee those guys would leave, but it is possible that they would follow their head coach to UConn. So even if UConn loses in this situation, they lose McNeely, they lose Mahaney, they lose some of those guys. If that happens, but Pikiell's able to bring some of the best recruits in the entire country with him to Storrs, you're at least feeling a little bit better if you're the UConn staff in that situation.
Yeah, you absolutely are, because those are some dudes I want. And it's like, also, is there any way we could get Cam Spencer to stay?
Right.
Since he came from Rutgers, we'd like to have more of that, please. Thank you very much. And Andy, what's funny about that is if you think about we said that short-term versus long-term thing. If you get a Steve Pikiell, I think a lot of people are saying, but the coaching carousel is essentially done. We're not going to spin it all up again and a bunch of coaches decide to leave. Well, you and I didn't think we'd be sitting here talking about Danny Hurley at lunchtime on a Thursday in early June, but here we are. If the right opportunities open up, coaches are going to go. And so don't sit here saying that at all. The coaching carousel could absolutely spin. Andy, if it's not Steve Pikiell, because I know a lot of that makes sense to you and I, we get it, we understand it, why that would be a good move. But I'm sure a lot of people listening and watching are saying, yeah, but what about a big name? What about dropping a bag? We always ask the question, who would you make tell you no? Let's speculate on a few of those potential names.
Yeah, it's hard because, again, I think a lot of coaches who would already be somewhat resistant, even if they were getting a big opportunity, are going to be even less resistant just because of the timing. Having said that, a couple options that stand out. One, you go after the only other coach who's won back-to-back national championships in the modern era. That's Billy Donovan. Go throw a bag at him. He's the coach of the Chicago Bulls. The season's over. The timing didn't work out with Kentucky because Chicago was still playing, but they're not playing anymore. You try to woo him back to college from the NBA level. Is it going to work? I would say probably not, but you got to give it a shot. How
wild would that be, Andy?
Right?
If Kentucky didn't wait and this happened and UConn got him. That would.
Well, and here's the thing that could happen. Billy Donovan didn't make the tournament after he went back-to-back at Florida. If he takes over for UConn loses a ton of talent, which would be a challenge for him to retain talent because he doesn't have connections. UConn doesn't make the tournament next year. He'd be, I think, probably the only coach in history to win backed-to-back national champions and then the next year not win. Obviously, it would be a different situation, but still something to keep an eye on. I think if you're talking current head coaches that you try to throw a bag at, you got to start Shaka Smart. Try to get him from Marquette's. He's in the conference. He's familiar with the opponents. He would have a lot of sway. He probably wouldn't lose a ton of talent. I think that's a move that you try to make there. Maybe he can bring some Marquette guys with him. TJ Otzelberger has virtually no connections to the East Coast, so I think that that's a challenging one. He's kind of an all Midwest guy, but what he has done at Iowa State is extraordinary. I think you have to try to see if you can get him. Nate Oates, obviously more connected to the East Coast from his time at Buffalo, a guy who's had a tremendous amount of success at Alabama, but why would he leave? Like, considering what they did last year, the success that they had, they get Mark Sears back, Grant Nelson's back, Latrell Wrightsell's back. Like, I don't see Nate Oates leaving Alabama, and I don't see UConn offering more money. So I don't think that that's going to be, it's just a more prestigious job in terms of like basketball history, but I don't think that's enough to convince Nate Oates to leave. So I think they're going to have a hard time. Shaka, maybe they can pull it off. Billy Donovan, maybe, but it's just hard. There's other like mid-major coaches they could go after, but I don't think that that's exactly where UConn's hoping to hear at this point.
No. And with Shaka, you would also get a bunch of people that say it didn't work at Texas.
Exactly.
So he got out of Austin before they got rid of him and went to Marquette. So what's to make us think it's going to work at UConn? You're going to have that if you try to go get Shaka. I'm just telling you.
100%. I'm absolutely in on that. And I think this is a conversation that I'm excited to have more. We're going to continue to look at what happened with Danny Hurley. Like I said, the latest report from Dana O'Neill of The Athletic is that this is hoping to get wrapped up by the weekend. John Fanta from Fox Sports has indicated that Danny is truly 50-50 right now. He just published an article a few minutes ago, and so it sounds like it's still really a tough decision. UConn is preparing an offer for him for a long-term extension. I think that's the big factor, that we don't know what that looks like at this point. But Isaac, I think that's all we can say on this topic at this point, unless you got anything else. But I think we come back to this on Monday. We circle back, we see what's going on, and we have either a huge conversation about a seismic shift in college basketball or another opportunity to talk about Danny Hurley spurning one of the biggest jobs in basketball to stay at UConn.
Literally only other thing that just popped up is that Purdue has just lost a top 40 player in the class of 2024. Cannon Catchings has been released from his NLI, so we'll probably catch up on that on
This
Monday.
is a great time for any program that has bad news in their basketball program to churn out, put it out now.
It's like last week when the Trump news was all hitting and everyone's like, news dump.
This is the time to do it. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on Locked On College Basketball. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with us on a Thursday afternoon. We appreciate you all tuning in, those of you who tune in later. Look forward to more updates on the situation as we learn more. This is a huge, huge storyline in college athletics. Very excited to get the opportunity to break it down with you all, break it down with you, my friend Isaac, and looking forward to continuing to talk about it more. But for those of you who are joining us, thank you again so much. We appreciate it. Apologies to the Lawyer family as they just lost a player there at Purdue. Let's go Wildcats. And until Monday, or potentially over the weekend if there's some breaking news, peace out.